Good evening, everyone. Eimear Burke here. Welcome to another Fireside Chat. I think it's our 9th one. My apologies for we had a technical hitch. So great. Hi, Linda. Welcome from Australia. So join me and just see who else is here. Apologies for the delay. Hi, Jules. How are you? That's great to see you. Hi from Skegness. Hi, Keith. Wonderful. Lauren. Oh, from South Africa, wonderful. And somebody from Lille. Hi, Red. That's great. Lovely. So pull a chair up to the fire, and I would like to introduce you to tonight's guest is OBOD member Elliue Tallett.
Hello.
Ellie, you're most welcome. And again, apologies for our technical hitch earlier. So just see there's somebody from Vancouver. Hi, Owen. He's looking forward to this. Luna, Fire Oak, lovely name. Hi, Gabriella. Luna, lovely. Carmen. Hi, Pauline and Les. And Benoit from Madrid. That's wonderful. And Lisa from Washington. And we have Carmen from New Zealand. Wonderful. It's great to see you all here. And there's a number of people greeting you personally too, Ellie. So it's wonderful.
Oh, hello to everybody I know.
So, Ellie, it's lovely to have you here. And
thank you.
I'm just remembering our very first conversation was on your master's program in spirituality, I think, in when we were in Carr-Gomm.
We were, yes.
So, I mean, you have a very interesting spiritual history, haven't you? So, that sounds very, what would I say? Ominous. But it's I think you have a very, very interesting story to tell. And so I suppose I know you're a Buddhist, but I suppose maybe start with that and then see how you arrived at Druidry after that.
Okay, so my story begins many decades ago, actually, and I was involved in the political side of Free Tibet, which was something I was really passionate about at the time. But I knew nothing at all about Buddhism. It was just about the injustice of what was happening in Tibet. And I'd be going on marches in London and protesting outside the Chinese embassy and all sorts of things. And somebody actually gave me a book, which was the biography of the Dalai Lama. And I remember trying to read it, and there were so many words in there. There were concepts I didn't understand. And I remember putting it to one side and just continuing. And I think maybe, I don't know, 3-4 years had passed before one day, sometimes you're looking at a bookshelf and a book jumps out and it's the right time to read the book. And I pulled the book out and started to read it. And although I still didn't understand the concepts, I was now really curious about what it was about, because the bits that did jump out to me seemed to touch something somewhere. And at the time I was living in Birmingham, and I remember looking up Buddhist centres in Birmingham and knowing there was one. And I was dropping my son at school, and I used to drive past this centre, for months it was, not having the guts to go in. And then one day I thought, I have to go in here, and I did. And I'd rung up beforehand, and they had a meditation night, and I'd gone along for meditation. And I basically felt at home doing what I was doing there. And I met a monk who was an English monk. So although he was a Tibetan Buddhist monk, he was English, called Saltram. And we became really good friends. And I used to go around and talk to him. And then one day he said, "Oh, I'm going back to India, to the monastery I'm at. You should come along." And it was like, ooh, I didn't do things like that myself at the time. And I was still in my 20s, my late 20s. And I thought, oh, okay, then I'll do it. And he said, well, there's a huge celebration called Losa. And in Tibetan, Lo is year and Saba is new. So Losa is the New Year celebration. Yeah. And many Tibetans don't know their birthday. So everybody celebrates New Year and their birthday. And it's like Christmas and everything all rolled together. So a really, really big event. And the monastery was in India, in Himachal Pradesh, not far from where the Dalai Lama is, actually.
Okay.
So I said, oh, okay, no problem, I'll go along. And so I organised to go along to the monastery for Losar. And oh my God, it was the worst trip ever. We flew to, I did a change of planes, I think, in Azerbaijan or something. Nice plane to Azerbaijan, and then a really dilapidated plane to India. I was Sortum had arranged for a taxi to pick me up at the airport. And we were late to the airport because that was it. There'd been fog at Delhi. So we got diverted to Bombay, sitting on the runway at Bombay for hours. And then we came back to Delhi. And this guy with a little sign with my name was still there waiting. I couldn't believe it. So anyway, if anyone's been to Delhi, you can imagine what this airport's like. And I'd been traveling for 24 hours at this stage. So I was just out of it. So he led us along to this taxi, and then it's a 15-hour taxi ride up to the monastery. 10 plus 5, 15. And it was a really, really long journey. And there's all sorts of stories from that journey as well. But what I remember was arriving at this monastery at about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I hadn't slept for almost 2 days properly. And at Losar, at this monastery, they do, I'm going off on a tangent here, I hope you don't mind. So at this monastery, for Losar, they do these prayers, which over the course of 2 weeks get faster and faster. So the first day, they take about 18 to 20 hours to do. And by the last day, they're doing them in 8 hours. So over those first days, they're so slow. And if you've heard Tibetan chanting, it's like the drummers go boom, boom. And I turned up, and I'd never been in a Buddhist monastery in my life. It's 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm completely spaced out. And I turn up at this monastery, and all I can hear are these really deep chants and drums. And it was like I was on another planet, but I nearly burst into tears. It was just emotionally overwhelming. They didn't let me into the monastery at the time because they called Sortum out because all these people around me speaking a language as well I didn't understand. And Sortum was like, oh my God, you smell. Go off to the guest house, go and have a shower, get some sleep, and I'll see you later. And I did. I slept, and I remember coming back over because it was like down a valley and the guest house was on the other side. And they said, go and sit there, and they put me in the shrine room and sat me on the floor. And it was just such a beautiful, surreal, amazing, culturally different, all of these emotions together. Yet I felt so grounded, absolutely grounded. And it was during the 2 weeks that I was there, I met the person who would become my teacher. And he looked like a little 13-year-old boy sitting at the front of the shrine on these little thrones they have. And I was just mesmerised by him, and I didn't understand why. But anyway, there's a whole story there. So that was really how I immersed myself initially in Buddhism, and many, many stories over decades from then.
So you said this boy that was going to be your teacher looked like a 13-year-old, or was a 13-year-old?
No, he looked he was 19, I think he was at the time, but he looked about 13, tiny, very small for his age. And in Buddhism, we believe in reincarnated teachers, and he was a reincarnated teacher. At that age already, he'd already done 2-3 year retreats where he's cut off from everybody. And I was introduced to him. Sortum introduced me to him. And I remember having conversations, and Sortum was translating because he didn't speak English and I didn't speak Tibetan. And so Sortum was like the middleman. And I was going back and forward for these teachings probably every couple of months. I was back and forward to India. Okay. And there was this one day, Sortum just said to me, that's it, I've had enough, I'm not translating anymore. And he threw a dictionary at me and he said, if you want to talk to him, go and learn Tibetan. And I remember sitting there, and I used to sort of be flicking through this book and pointing. And the very first word I learned was dene, which means and then. And I'd sort of, and dene, dene. And I still got this book, and it just fell apart on me in the end. But basically, I learnt Tibetan and ended up speaking and writing Tibetan.
Wow. And you still have it, you haven't lost it.
I should imagine it's very rusty, but it's still there, yeah.
Wow. So you were doing that for how many years?
20 years. Must be
then,
over 20 years, yeah.
Okay, so then what brought you to Druidry? Or how did
Oh,
you make
yeah, really long story again. So many things happened in those years. They have foundational practices that you do, and my teacher took me through those, which is like 100,000 of this and 100,000 of that and 100,000 of that and 100,000 of that. And then he was traveling to Scotland. So by this time, as the years progressed, he learned English and started traveling and teaching. And he was teaching at Sammeling in Scotland. And he was teaching a course on the nature of mind, which was a 5-year course. And you had to attend every single year. You couldn't just jump in later. And the 5th year was him transmitting instructions on the nature of mind. And at the end of that, he basically said to everybody, not just me, but I've taught you everything you need. Your job now is just go and do it, basically. And I think I was having some problems at that stage. And I remember sitting and having a talk with him, and other things had been going on because I set a charity and a Buddhist centre up. So all sorts was going on in my life anyway at the time. And I remember saying to him, I've got problems with the cultural side of what I'm doing. So I had no problems at all with the teachings and the practice, but I didn't understand why I had to shake this sort of skull drum here and blow this trumpet here, and why things had to be certain colours. And he was explaining to me how when Buddhism went to Tibet, Bumpa, which is a shamanistic tradition, was the religion of Tibet at the time. And a lot of the practices were absorbed into Buddhism to make it palatable to the locals. And so he was actually talking about the culture, it's Tibetan culture. And he was sort of saying it's very difficult as an English girl sitting out there to understand this culture. And I got that, I'd done an MBA previously about the cultural paradigm. And so I got what he was saying. And his solution was go back to England. And I want you to investigate how Christianity and the religion beforehand has been affected, and how Christianity developed because of what was there before. Something as simple as that. And I'm the sort of person, I love books. And so I came back, and the way I decided to do it was to go to university again and do an MA in Western esotericism, which I did. So I came back and went to do my MA, and I was introduced to all sorts of pagan subjects within that. And also, importantly, I met so many people who were pagans who were doing the MA or teaching on the MA. And through them, I was introduced to other people like Sarita Deste, David Rankin. And I was going along and studying witchcraft and going to covens and going along to the OTO and all sorts of things, because these are the people I was mixing with. And then one day, it was David Rankin actually said to me, I think you should think about Druidry. I think that's more akin to what you're looking for. And I had no idea that Druids existed in England at the time. And it was really he who put me in contact with, well, not in contact, but he mentioned OBOD. And I looked up and I read the website and I thought, oh, this is really interesting. So that's really the route that took me there.
So what do you think he saw in you that guided you towards Druidry, as opposed to, you said you were, in covens and the OTO. So what was it, do you think he saw in you that he decided that Druidry was more for you than the other?
At the time, I couldn't have answered that. But I think having done, especially the Bardic grade, which is very much elemental based and in touch with the land, etc. And when actually I think about practicing as a Buddhist, many of my practices were governed by the moon and the cycle of the moon. It was very elemental, etc. And so I know when I was doing my bardic grade, it's like these two things were so co-joined. It was almost like, well, I know I did my bardic grade twice. And the reason I did it twice is I was a little bit arrogant, I think, the first time round, because I thought, well, I know all this. Why am I studying this? I know, of course, I know this, you know. But the thing is, I knew a Buddhist interpretation. I didn't know my interpretation or, you know, my land's interpretation of what was happening. So I did it very much on an intellectual level. And it was only at the end when I was doing my review, I thought, I haven't done this properly. I've got to start again. So I started again and tried to have, you know, what we call Zen mind, beginner's mind. And it was only that second time round, I think I started to see what my teacher had already told me to look for.
Okay. So then so are you a Druid or a Buddhist, or are you, I don't know, a Buddhist and a Druid, or?
I'm a Buddhist who's got an extraordinarily good ground in Buddhism. So I tend to think of it more that way round. And sometimes we take a pathway, don't we? And that pathway, we don't know where it's going to lead. But when we look back, we can think, well, actually, I was so blessed to have gone through what I did for those decades, because now in my Druid practice, it's given me such a firm foundation for the practices that I'm doing. So the meditations, the visualizations, etc.
It's interesting when you were talking about the difficulties you had with, say, Buddhist culture, and which is based in that landscape in Tibet and other places in the East. How do you connect with your landscape here? Or actually, it's Kent, isn't it? Yes.
Mm. Well, what was what was interesting is I moved away from Kent with work and in my 20s as well. So I lived away from Kent for probably about 15 years, something like that. And I didn't particularly have a desire to come back. But when I met my current husband, he was from Kent, I came back because he wasn't going to move away. And it was odd because there were two things. Number one, things had changed a lot the more I got to know it. But then there were also a lot of very familiar things and places that I remember going with my mum and dad, and, you know, places like I remember reading The Ballad of Bluebell Hill to the retreat once. And Bluebell Hill is a very special place to me from my childhood. And there's Neolithic structures there. And it was almost like, I remember going to Cauldron Long Barrow and just sitting there, which is not far from where I live, and things start to settle and you start to feel more at home. And often I have a joke with my husband, because wherever we drive, I insist we go through the countryside. Because Kent, for those who don't know Kent, we've got the South Downs and we've got the North Downs, and then they come into a valley, and in the middle is what we call the Weald. So it was at one stage as woodland all the way through, and there's still big pockets of woodland all the way through, and it is just so homely and so beautiful. And the whole of Kent just feels this, you know, this is where my family lived for many generations, and well, certain lineages, and this is where they walked, and this is where they died, and this is where their ashes were spread. And it starts to feel this, you know, I've come home.
Beautiful. You mentioned those sites now. They're not familiar to me. Are they well known?
Oh yes, yeah. And they're well known in the pagan community here, and there's a lot of pagan groups that practice at these sites.
Would they be, you know, what would be your favorite sacred site that you've been to?
Oh gosh.
One that calls to you the most, or that has the strongest call for you?
I would actually say the Weald, because when it yeah, WEALD, and I think it's from Old English Wald, WALD, woodlands,
Okay, okay.
So the Weald is, I mean, there are still big stretches of the woodlands where it is just I mean, it's stunning. It's stunningly beautiful, but it's a very, very calm and energizing place. And so you've got certain Neolithic structures dotted within the Weald, some up on the hillsides as well. But it, Kent is obviously the entry to England from the continent and has been for many years. So there's an awful lot of our ancestors have actually come to this land through Kent. And so, although you can say we're a bit of a mongrel race here, I think also you can actually say that it's steeped in that history as well. And the pathways, Pilgrim's Way follows the North Downs on the other side of the Weald. And so you've got all of these ancient trackways as well.
Wow. And are you more drawn to woodland or the more man-made structures? Because you seem to have both in the Weald, but is there one that calls you more than the other?
Woodland, definitely.
I'm the same.
I mean, I adore the structures. I know when we were in Broceliande, I mean, it's just awe-inspiring. But the woodland itself, it just talks to you.
It does. It does. And it's interesting, you're talking about these pathways and, Kent being a gateway or a doorway into Britain. How do you honor your ancestors?
I think there's two sorts of ancestors. There's your immediate ancestors and those further back. And it was quite interesting when I was doing the ovate grade and looking at ancestors. And I remember telling you my grandfather was an Irish traveller. And the only reason I know that is from his marriage certificate. I didn't know that beforehand. And you were going, oh, for sure. You said to me, oh, for sure, that's not his name. I remember you saying that to me. So because you said, it's just I said what his name was, William Moore, and we had a long discussion. And you go, oh, for sure, I can go and see if he's a traveller. That's not his real name. And but the thing is, I think immediate ancestors, I think of parents and grandparents. And, I was raised in a very, very working class family, and they weren't that well off, actually. And I remember my father saying to me so many times, you can have anything you want if you work for it. And, he was a staunch unionist and Labour supporter and all of that sort of thing.
Yes.
And the one thing I've been quite gifted with is having an inquisitive brain. And so I think by what I do is I work hard to expand myself and help those around me to do that. And that is the way I honour what they gave me, because they struggled so hard for me to have what I had. I think beyond that, further back, it's very difficult, I find, because when I was doing that, my family tree just shoots all over the place to the MacLeans of Scotland and Irish travellers and farmers who've been in Kent for hundreds of years. And it's very difficult, I find, to think of a way that works for me to honour all of that. And so what I find is, for me, what's right is to do the best I can for those who are going to come after me. And that's the balance I tend to find.
And how do you do that, or how do you prepare the way for the future generations? I mean, that sounds like it's a really it's a tough question. I'm not calling you to task, but I'm just interested in how you can even attempt that.
Well, because Buddhism was such a big part of my life, a lot of my references are going to be to that life. And I mentioned earlier, I set up a charity, and I am, and maybe I'll have to justify this in a moment, I'm a corporate girl. And so, honouring my father, I worked hard, I succeeded, and blah, blah, blah. And one of the things I did was earn money. And I had a good business brain, and I was able to set a charity up. And I wanted to help promote Buddhism because it was doing so much for me. And when I actually set the charity up, I was able to get people together to generate more and more and more money. And it ended up, we bought, oh gosh, I built a school, a clinic, a refugee centre, a hotel in Delhi that funds them now. We bought a mountain in Nepal for refugee nuns and built stuff there. I set up a Buddhist centre in Wales. And all of those are continually helping the people who need the help that they can get. Now, when I moved back, I went through a big period of trying to transition from what I was within the Buddhist world to what I am now. And that's been a difficult transition. And in that, I'm still struggling to think, I know I've spoken to you about this, that I don't want to work anymore. The deeper I go into my Gursi and the further I go, the more I just want to stop work and let that generate itself within me. But there's this other side, which is conflicting, which is actually, I know I can continue to work and earn money and do good with that. And which do I do? And 2 days ago, actually, I drew the tarot cards because I draw cards to see what comes out. And a card came out and I'm getting all ready to turn it over. And there were 2 cards together, which I didn't realise. And I turned them over and one was the Queen of Swords and one was the Queen of Cups. And it was like that just summed up the position at the moment I find myself in. I need to say no more.
And what I'm really, yes, so I suppose you stay at the moment holding both of those until some clear path appears before you, I take it.
Yes.
I'm really impressed with all the projects that you say you've set up that are in Tibet that are still going, that they are sustainable.
No, they're not in Tibet. So apart from the mountain and the nuns retreat, which is in Nepal, the rest are in India.
In India, okay. But they're sustainable. They're still going.
Yes.
As somebody who worked in Africa, etc., and I've seen many, many projects who start off really, really well and for various reasons are not sustainable, I just have to say, my hat off to you. I am full of admiration. That is some achievement. I think Frank Martinez says you're a fascinating person. You are, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Frank.
Ben Was is a nice Queen's mix, Queen of Swords and Queen of Cups. But I think to be able to create things that actually are still ongoing, I think it's wonderful. Are you involved still in that charity?
No. As I say, there's so many stories. So one of the other things was when I set the charity up and it was growing, before I get to that, I've got to tell you this story because it is so lovely. And it's a story about how when you do good things happen. And so we'd been asked by some Tibetan teachers if we could help raise funds for the nuns. These nuns had walked over the Himalayas and were living in tin shacks, basically. And I visited them. They were lovely women, but very persecuted in Tibet, not allowed to study. And if they had have studied and stayed, all sorts of things could have happened. So we were asked if we could help. And I remember I used to run programs where we'd invite teachers and put on teachings and people would come along. And this elderly gentleman came up to me at the end of one of these teachings, and he'd been born in Nepal. And his daughter, he'd always wanted his daughter to become a Tibetan nun, Buddhist nun, sorry. But she had a degenerative disease and was, she didn't have a long lifespan ahead of her. And he was actually a surgeon, but he'd retired. And he said to me, a surgeon in a hospital. Yes. So he actually said to me, I can go back to work and do some locum work, not as a surgeon, but within the medical field. And I'm willing to do that for 1.5 years. And all the money I earn, I'm going to give to you. And with that money, you can do some good for the nuns in Nepal. And he wanted to do it in memoriam to his daughter, who he knew was slipping away. And he did that. And he gave us a cheque for something like £150,000. It was just crazy. And with that money, we literally bought a mountain in Nepal, which had been paddy fields, but the water had dried up. So we bought this mountain, and they've actually built a monastery for the nuns there. But as part of the inverted commas deal, we said they had to teach the children locally to read and write and have a medical facility at the nunnery, which would service the local communities. I've completely lost what I was talking about, but that was the story. Oh, so,
good things happen.
yes. Yeah, so the one thing I did learn, as I say, is that when you do something good and you do it with integrity and without self-care for yourself, because it's aimed at other people, then good things will follow and happen from that. I was telling you that for a reason, and I can't remember why.
It'll come back to you. It'll come back to you. When has Druidry? I know certainly your Buddhism has. When has your Druidry supported you?
Oh my gosh! Every single day I have to work. I don't know if my husband's listening to this, and if he is, I've got to say the word "the valley" because we've got a bet. So there you go, Kevin. But what I would actually say, I find work extraordinarily stressful, and the more I do it, the more stressful I find it. And I think there's two reasons for that. I think the first reason is that the older you get, the less accommodating you are to bad practice that you see. And I'm not a permanent employer. I specifically at the moment go into the NHS and help sort out hospitals that are in special measures. And I get increasingly frustrated when I see bad practice and it shouldn't be there. But I can't really be over the top condemning because I'm there to guide and help. And I think, that sword lady is just just do what you're told. But the other side of it is, as I immerse in the Guernsey more and more and continue, and it's been a decade now, I'm changing as a person and there's things I want to do. And so I think what Druidry is doing, it started by balancing me. And, I knew when that time was and I felt balanced. But the problem is it's switching the other way now. And that desire to immerse myself more, and I'm not the sort of person who can just flick through a graph. So the part I'm doing at the moment around astrology, and I'm reading away and I'm thinking, well, I've never touched astrology. So before I know it, I've enrolled at the astrology university in America and I'm starting a course there to do, and it's like, I want time to do that because I can't do both. And that's the dichotomy of where I am at the moment, I guess.
Wow, that's you get
there. But anyway, that's how it helps me. It keeps me sane.
This is just Sandy Coombs says, Ellie, amazing. It's very much needed. I'm sure your heart will guide you to where you're needed next. Lots of love. That is so true. So somebody else, that's what I need, balance and peace. And I suppose who wouldn't welcome balance and peace, and I can imagine that the work you're doing in the NHS is really, really important. But then there's that thing about the cost to yourself and how you hold those.
My teacher told me when I was in a very my last permanent job was very stressful. And he gave me two bits of advice that I still carry out to this day. And he said, number one, when it's too stressful, go and sit on the toilet, put the lid down, shut the door and meditate, because it's the only place you can go where you're going to get peace. And I still do that, when it's too much, I'll just go and meditate. But the other thing he said to me, and it's not so relevant now, but it was when I was permanent, is the further up the ladder you go, the more corruption and lack of integrity there is. And he said to me, if ever you're faced with having to make a decision and it's difficult, go into your office, shut the door, sit down and ask yourself one question. And the question is, do I personally benefit from what I'm about to do? And he said, and if you personally benefit, you can almost guarantee it's the wrong decision.
Well done.
And so I hold on to those two things.
I think it's a great rule of thumb.
Mm.
Yeah, because then you can't do wrong. I mean, then you know. Okay.
Yeah, if
I
this is
like
for
the
me, yeah. Oh, sorry.
that it's the wrong one. That
Mm.
it's for the other.
Hmm.
Just to get back to the meditation piece, because I'm just thinking of now in this current pandemic, and up to now we were doing really well in our lockdown, that our numbers were coming down, and they were thinking by the 1st of December we'll come out of level 5, and then we'll graduate towards a bit more opening by Christmas time, for example. But the numbers have stopped. The trajectory is changing. So now we're back into this all uncertain place again, even though we're still in uncertainty, but we thought, okay, we're heading that way, so maybe there's a little bit of light and all that stuff. And I'm just conscious that we're back into that wobbly bit again. And that importance of, going into that quiet place and meditating for, doesn't have to be a long time, but to stay in stillness in the moment. And I suppose your Buddhism and Druidry provides us with that strategy to actually live in the moment and to tolerate, or not just tolerate, but to live with uncertainty, and to be okay with it in that moment, or in this moment, should we say.
One of the things that has grown throughout my period of study of Druidry is the sacred grove. And when I first started, you create pictures in your mind, and you go through a stage of wondering, is it me creating it, or is it coming to me, and you try not to grasp on to either of them. But the one thing, when I go to my sacred grove, it didn't happen immediately, but early on there was a woman who used to meet me. I used to walk up the river, go over this little wooden bridge in my vision, and on the other side was a cottage with all herbs drying outside the cottage. And there was a woman who introduced herself to me. And through all of the years that I've been going there, sometimes she's there, sometimes she's not. Sometimes she'll leave a note pinned on the door, or the door will be open and the kettle will be on and there'll be a note on the table. And something really odd happened, two months ago. So on Instagram, I was just looking at some images, and this image just jumped out at me. And I was like, oh my God, that's her. That is what, I won't say her name, but that is her. And I was just so shocked by the whole thing that I wrote to the artist and said, where does this picture come from? And it's a picture. Actually, I'll tell you what, I've got the picture here on my shrine, because I bought a copy from her. You see her?
Yes.
And so it's actually, she painted, it's called The Wise Woman, interestingly, from a tarot deck, the Enchanted Forest tarot deck. And that picture, so I said, who is she, etc. And she said it's a friend of hers that she painted, and she appears a lot in this tarot deck. But anyway, so the reason I was mentioning the Sacred Grove is that is the place now that I go to. And I think what we all need to do is to find that safe place where we can go. And it's a place where, there's no judgment, there's no nastiness, there's no hatred, there's nothing to justify to, and just be. And I think those sorts of places, whether they are real and we're sitting in a woodland or by a beach, or whether they're in our mind, it doesn't matter, it's the same thing. But we need those places of sanctuary at the moment.
Absolutely. And we're lucky as Druids to have access to that, because, working with the Sacred Grove was one of the earliest practices that we learn. And
Yes.
it's there. And absolutely. Do you, I mean, I suppose I'm not too sure if you've actually answered this indirectly, but do you have a daily practice?
Yes. I mean, that's a difficult one as well. Again, as a Buddhist, I had a really rigid daily practice that I used to get up at 3:30 in the morning and do for 2 or 3 hours. And I thought that would transfer over easily, but it hasn't. So I have a daily practice that has developed as I've gone through the Gwelsi, and it changes with each new lesson and things I'm focusing on. Do I do it every day? No. And I don't have a set time I do it. And I think that's because of my own life, you know, the structure of my own life is. And it was interesting. I thought I'd get back into it in lockdown, but that was really difficult for me to push myself to do that when so much other noise was going on. But I've persuaded my husband and my son to revamp my shed to make it more akin to practice. So it was here before, but what I tend to find, and when I was really young, I don't know about other people, but I find it when I read, I have to stop and have a doze. And so I don't know, it may be a chapter, it may be 2 chapters, whatever. And I've done this since I was at school. I remember being little and falling asleep on the desk whenever I was reading. And I think in hindsight, I wasn't falling asleep, I was just digesting. And I do read a lot. And so I think the contemplation rather than meditation on what you've just read is as good as meditating. And if you can get into that habit of allowing yourself to just rest in where you've just been, and let it permeate you, that is daily practice as well.
How do you know it's just as good?
You can feel it. So if you sit and meditate, you know you've stilled your mind. You can feel your mind is being stilled. And I think in contemplation, you get that settlement at the same level. And so, you know, meditation doesn't have to be 3 or 4 hours. It can just be 10 seconds and you've stilled your mind.
Oh, absolutely. I think well, for me, I used to be a moving meditator, as in let me walk a lap or something.
Yeah.
Now I am very happy to sit with stillness.
Yes.
The idea of having to do it for an hour or 2 hours, I go, no. And straight away, whatever it is, I've resisted. But if it's a few moments, I go in very deep. And then I know, wow, I've been there. And often I will stay longer because I don't have to stay longer. And there's that.
And actually, doing it frequently is probably better than doing it once and then allowing your mind to be crazy monkey whenever it wants to be.
I think so, yeah. And I suppose also it's about finding what suits you and what suits your temperament and also your life situation. I think if you're in a monastery, for example, and live a very, very structured life, it's very easy. There's a gong or a bell that tells you when to wake up and when to eat and when to pray.
Yeah,
and that's very, very much easier than when we have all the current distractions to actually be able to find that quiet space.
I agree. And I also, you know, I've learned that being a monk in a monastery is not superior to the person who provides a bowl of food so that the monk can be in a monastery. And, you know, the Buddha himself said that you need the practitioner and you need the supporter to come together to make things happen. And providing that support in a mindful way is as good as sitting and doing the meditation as well.
I think that's so important because that's so validating of everyone's role in the world and whatever their purpose is, that all of it is valid. There isn't one that's superior to another. I think that's wonderful.
Yes.
You mentioned earlier your you know, you were, I'm not going to use the word dabble, but you were exploring the OTO, you were exploring Wicca, and are you a magician or a mystic?
I think people would describe me in different ways. I actually think by doing magic, you become a mystic. And if you're a mystic, you're making magic happen. And so, you know, sometimes I've done things through the witchcraft route that I'm not proud of. And I learned a lot by doing that. And I would actually say that when you do magic, if it's done with the right motivation, it's a mystical experience. If it's done with the wrong motivation, it's the furthest thing from a mystical experience you can get. So I would actually say by doing magic, you experience mysticism. And if you want mysticism, you're making magic happen anyway. You know, what can be more magical than being in touch with your divine, whatever that is?
I think that's a lovely way of putting it. And I don't know, I have said this before, but I don't know if you've heard me say that the Irish word for Druidry and magic is the same.
Yeah, I can believe that.
You know, and I love that. There's so many times I use the word, this is magical. And it feels magical, but it's mystical. So it's that, and I think maybe it's my inability to express it very well, but I know what it means.
Yes, yeah, it's a feeling, isn't it?
Exactly. What would you say your biggest challenge has been that you've overcome?
Gosh, so many again. On a spiritual or personal level? Either.
Whichever one. Yeah.
I think on a spiritual level, I mean, you're aware of this. So the deeper I got into my spiritual practice, the more I enjoyed isn't the right word, the more I felt I wanted a spiritual life. And I had set my heart on being a nun. I wanted to be a Tibetan Buddhist nun. And I remember year after year after year, I'd ask my teacher, can I be a nun? Can I be a nun? Can I be a nun? And every single time I asked, he'd say, no, not now, not now, no, not quite when, no. You know, and it became almost a bit of a joke, I think, but I meant it from the heart. And then I remember one day I said to him, you know, I really, really want to become a Buddhist nun, please, can I? And he went, yes, you can. And it's like, I remember every cell in my body just coming alive, you know. And he said, but I want you to take your vows with my teacher. And I was like, oh, okay, but I can do that, you know, which meant going back to India. Within 3 days, I was on a plane to India. And the hotel, through the charity that we built, I was staying there, and there was a guy, let's call him Tuntok. That's not his name, but let's call him Tuntok. So Tuntok was there, and he'd been a monk, but wasn't anymore, but was working at this hotel. And I said to him, you know, blah, blah has said I can be a nun, I need to see blah, blah. And I said, can you please arrange it for me? And he was like a bit shocked, but yeah, of course. So he arranged for me to go and see him. And I went to see him, and I remember because he was sitting on this little platformy thing, and I sat down on the floor. And all I remember at the moment is just verbal garbage coming out of my mouth. And it was like da 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 da, and then da 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 da, and then da 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 da, and it was just all coming out. And then I said, and then he said to come and see you, and I can be a nun. And all the way through the conversation, he'd just been doing this, you know, listening, didn't say a word. And he got to the very end of it, and he just cocked his head to the side and looked at me and he went, I don't think so. And it was like, I didn't know what to do. I wanted to burst into tears. I wanted to scream. It was just every emotion. And I was incredibly rude. I remember I just got up and walked out the room because I didn't want to be there. And I got back and I said to Tuntuk, let's say, I need to get home, get me on the next plane out of here. I've got a ticket, but can you please just get me out of here? And I flew home, and I think the first time ever I felt real anger. And I knew it was real anger because it lasted for months. I was so angry. And the months passed and I carried that anger and it didn't go. And I think it took about a year. And then I got a phone call from my teacher who was up at Samiling. And he said, oh, I'm up at Samiling teaching. Would you like to come and see me? I'm thinking, oh, bloody hell, I don't want to see you. But I said, you know, being polite, oh, yes, of course, I'll come up. And I drove all the way up to Scotland. And I sat in the teachings and I didn't see him for about 3 days. And I think it's about day 3 I went to see him. And I was sitting with him and he was talking to me. And it was like I had the devil here and I had an angel here talking in my ears. Okay. And he was asking me questions like, oh, did you go back to India? And it's like the devil's going, you bloody well know I did. And the angel spoke and said, yes, I did. And, you know, I went back and Oh, very interesting. And did you say, you know I did. You bloody well know I did. Why are you doing this? And he just going, yes, yes, I did. And the conversation went on. And then basically at the very end, I said to him, why did you do that to me? And he said, because you would not listen. And he said, this is not your path. And, you know, this life isn't for you as a nun. And at the end of the day, you had to listen to somebody who you would listen to, basically. And he'd sent me out there to be told that actually being a nun wasn't the path for me. And it settled. It really, I wasn't forgiving at that stage, but it certainly settled. And that was the second to last time I saw him, because the last time I saw him was when he said, go and have a look at the culture. But I remember driving back home and getting home, and it was like, how beautiful is it that somebody who could have just said, yes, go and be a nun and taken my possessions and all of that sort of stuff, said, actually, this isn't for you, and could see that that path was not cut out for me. And I think that allowed me then to heal. And it was the biggest thing, the biggest challenge I think I had to get over.
Because I imagine your confidence must have taken some battering, given all that you've done and all the study and all that you've achieved, to be told no.
Yeah, I mean, I'd come back, and it's interesting. They use this word klesha in, you know, all these negative emotions we have. And I was having thoughts that I couldn't believe I was having. You know, I've wasted all my life doing all this charity work. I've set up Buddhist, I've done. And the thing was, what I wasn't thinking is, look at the wonderful opportunities I've been given. And how wonderful is it to have someone you trust so implicitly who will not use you and what you've got to give, but will actually give you the opportunity of going and living the life you should be living, rather than pushing you down a road you shouldn't be going down.
Who said, I used to think it was Emerson, but it's not, opposition is true friendship? Do you know who said that?
No, I don't. No.
Maybe somebody's listening, but and I think that's, you know, the honest and the greatest gift a friend can give you is something like that. Is that
yes,
the bold honesty and how difficult it is. But you've come through that, and you recognize the gift in that, which you know, is to your credit.
Yeah, it taught me an awful lot. A lot of good lessons came out of that.
And we get to meet you, Ellie.
Oh, thank you. So you met me many years ago. But,
yeah, but if you become a nun, we wouldn't have.
No, that's true. That's very true. You know, I'd have been sitting in a monastery in India or wherever.
Yeah. So it's interesting how adverse situations, or I mean disappointments, you know, can actually take us down the right path. I'm hoping this is the right path. It's William Blake. Thanks, Brendan. He said opposite to friendship. Do you have any regrets?
I do regret I didn't find OBOD in my 20s. I think because the skills that I've developed, and I see them as skills through Buddhism, because, you know, I adore Buddha. Buddha was a human being. He was nothing else but a human being who showed us how to get what he managed to do for himself. And I think those teachings, you can access those whether you're a Buddhist or not a Buddhist. But I think if I'd have discovered OBOD in my 20s, I think my whole life would have taken a different path. You know, the part of me that it's not that I don't like it, but the part of me I find difficult is the corporate side of my life. And I would have loved to have lived a life without those conflicting issues that I've had to deal with all the way through that. And, you know, the world has changed a lot since I entered the corporate world in my 20s. And, you know, I've seen nastiness at its worst. But I've seen, you know, I have seen women being abused. And I've seen the ramifications in that and how it's all been covered up and all of those awful issues. I've seen racism. I've seen all of that in the corporate world, and the world is slowly changing. But I think it's almost a cowardice side of me in that I wish I hadn't have had to experience that. And I think if I'd have discovered something like OBOD early on, maybe my life would have been an academic life or something, but it would have been more contemplative life than it has been. And so I've had a balance, well, not a balance, the corporate world at the moment, trying to bring it all back. But I think that's my biggest regret, is that I was pushed into that so early on.
Sunday, just Linda is saying here, I found OBOD in the 90s, but I didn't feel worthy to approach. I regret not seizing the opportunity.
Yeah.
And it's that interesting thing about feeling not worthy to be or to join a particular path, and when in fact we all are. But we have to find that out for ourselves. I mean, some people say, you know, I don't know if some of the feedback from these conversations where people have written to me and said, I never thought I could call myself a Druid, but then I've heard people's stories and I think, yeah, I can call myself a Druid. It's, you don't have to earn it. It's something you are.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
I do think one of the things I'd like to see in OBOD is something for the youth of the world, if you like. There's a woman, Danny something. She does Esoteric Moment on YouTube. I really enjoy her. Sorry?
She's American.
Yes.
Yes, I've heard it. Yes,
Yeah.
I think she's a member of it. She's very
she's done the OBOD course all the way through. And when she actually ends her talk, she talks about saplings, you know, for her little saplings. And I've so often thought you need a page on your OBOD site or some course designed for saplings, young people who have this interest. And I was listening to, I don't know if you saw it, but I'm reading it at the moment. Barack Obama's book came out yesterday, and I'm reading it. And he was on television being interviewed about the book. And one of the things he said, and I think it's relevant to this, is that because he was asked what gives him hope for the future, and he was talking about his daughters and how, you know, the concept of being racist or homophobic or anything like that just doesn't even enter their mind. And he said his biggest hope for the future is the youth, because they're growing up in a world where so much is accepted now that those old ways that he says even he had are just going to be falling away. And I think as an organisation, it'd be lovely to be able to nurture, you know, these people who want to be more involved in nature-based spirituality, and have something that does grow them. And I loved her word sapling. I think that's just what they are.
Well, I will talk to you about this afterwards.
I think we ought to talk to Danny as well.
It's a very good idea, Ellie. You've got yourself a job. No, I agree, and it's interesting that there are a number of younger people joining. I mean, there've been some comments recently about, you know, older members who are kind of not particularly broad-minded, which I object to as an 80-something-year-old. Anyway, but remember the older members were once very young. Like Philip was initiated when he was 18, and you need to be able to actually join the order. But that there are many young people now joining as well, which is absolutely wonderful, because I've met them on my travels, and hopefully that will grow. But I like the idea of saplings, and given that you know, a tree metaphor is an absolutely beautiful one. So watch the space. What is the most reckless thing you've ever done?
I'm thinking of a specific day, and this was back in I was in my late 20s with the charity and all of this going, and at the time, I'll say, I was financial controller at Railtrack at the time. And I remember sitting at my desk and I was working and all these sorts of things were going on. And I had a phone call and it was from India where we were doing these projects. And it was like, oh my God, we need to talk to you. And I said, okay. I said, I've got things I've got to do. Can you ring back in about? No, we need to see you. And I remember, I can't go into the details, but I remember sort of wrapping up a meeting. I had a secretary. I hate to say, I had a secretary at the time. Gave her my card, said, phone ahead and book a ticket. See if you can get me a ticket to India, and she did. And I left the meeting, got on a plane, flew to India. I had to travel, sort a problem out, travel back, fly back, and go into meetings the day after that. So 2 days later, and it was like, I cannot believe I just jumped on a plane to go and sort out a problem that could have been sorted out over the phone, that people won't sort out over the phone because of cultural issues. And it was like, why on earth am I just doing that? And there were so many of those, so many. I remember my teacher was in Nepal and rang me up and said, can you come out to Nepal? And I said, well, no, not really, I'm busy. And he said, I really need to see you. And it's like the next day I'd be on a plane to Nepal. And God knows how I juggled it all. I have no idea. I had a son at boarding school as well. And my son was at boarding school because I was a single parent. And it was the only way I could give him a stable life because our local school was atrocious. And, I was young and I was trying to juggle all this. So my 20s were reckless every single day.
You seem to have combined a recklessness with incredible generosity. I mean, for somebody in India to ring you up and say, I need you to come, I need to talk to you. And yes, it's reckless getting on the plane and juggling all of that, but the generosity of it and making yourself available to visit, to sort out whatever it was. That's, I mean, so big hearted. I mean, it's mind blowing that
the funny thing is, I think when you're younger, you don't think that way. I think we think that way as we get older. Back then, it wasn't even something you thought about, you just did. And if you're the sort of person who's going to go and set up a charity, of course you're going to jump on a plane to help somebody. And it's not something that you don't sit and say, oh, I'm going to do something that's really nice and generous. And you wouldn't even reflect on it. You only reflect on it later. But I guess that's why most reckless things we do when we're younger.
They're impulsive. But and it's wonderful to have that because, well, it culminates in generosity of spirit.
Yeah.
And that thing about, it's a bit like for your children, you don't think about, well, what's the cost to me? It's like your child, however old, has expressed a need, and you straight, is that imperative? You don't even have to be altruistic. It's just
you just do.
You just do. It's mind blowing still.
Only in retrospect.
Even though you were young, it's still very generous.
Yeah. Thank you.
I'm not so concerned about your recklessness. It's your generosity. Is that flying there and flying back and then doing a job and managing and juggling all of that. I think it's wow. What are you grateful for, Ellie?
My mind.
Tell us a little bit about your mind.
So I don't know. I remember when I was very young, my wardrobe was my favourite place. And it was because I could go in my wardrobe with my torch and my book and just lose myself. And actually, it's probably where I had my first spiritual sort of experiences up the faraway tree with Enid Blyton. And I used to adore just getting into my wardrobe and shutting the door, and I'd have my torch. And I think from a very young age, I found so much in books that was magical. I remember the very first, my mum did a job as a cleaner for a short while, and it was at the local college. And she came home one day and she'd brought home an encyclopedia, and it didn't have covers on it. It had been thrown out, basically. And I read that back to back, the whole thing. And I remember getting to a part which was about the universe. and it was talking about, you know, stars and planets and explaining all this, that, and the other. And that was on my mind. I was only about 9 years old. And it was on my mind for so long. And I was starting to have these dreams that I was in the universe. And I remember distinctly, and I'm sure other people have had this dream. I had this dream of I'd travel through the universe and I'd get to the end of the universe and there'd be a brick wall. And then I'd start thinking, what's on the other side of the brick wall? And then it all starts again, doesn't it? And I think that's sort of I am completely inquisitive about everything. And I mean, we've got a bit of a joke. I said to Kevin when I met him that I'd never move in with him unless I could have a library. We were talking about your library earlier. And it wasn't a standing joke. I was deadly serious. But we moved in and I didn't have a library. But he said to me, so we've got a dining room and living room together just outside, and it's like 24 foot long. And he said, you can have that wall. So that wall, floor to ceiling, the whole thing is books, double stacked books. And on top of that, I've still got a lock-up and a half full of books, which I've not been able to fit into the house. And I think I've got something like 10,000 books or something like that. And so I love the fact I've got an inquisitive mind.
I love the bit about the dream coming to a brick wall. And many people say, okay, that's the end of the line. It's an obstacle. I can't go any further. But you want to know, it's not the end. It's obviously the beginning of something else. So what is behind it? And I think that's fascinating.
It was like when it computed, it's like if you've got a brick wall, you've got to have something on the other side of the brick wall. There can't be nothing. So what is it?
I think that's a lovely worldview, a lovely perspective to have. Not everybody has it. So many people either put brick walls all around them or see them ahead of them and recognize them as obstacles rather than something to actually ask the question, I wonder what is behind it. And I think one of the things, I think curiosity is a great quality to have. I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, and I used to ask questions as a child, and I was told not to. You know, don't ask questions. Yeah. Protestants ask questions, and they interpret the Bible, and that's why you have the Protestant religions. Roman Catholic, you're only the one, and that's a very good idea not to let them think for themselves. But that, you know, greater than you have gone before you and accept it. Just accept it's a mystery and don't ask questions. And I found that in my nursing training. My first report was, you're asking too many questions. People don't like that. So I shut up and never asked another question during the rest of my training. And it's horrendous because questions and curiosity about people, like what we're doing now, and I'm learning, I've known you for, well, I suppose 6 years now, but I've discovered more through this conversation, something that's new, and curiosity about people and about things and about concepts and about ideas and about the world and the earth and where we're going, to me is food.
But it's interesting in situations, for example, fascist situations, where one of the first things they do is to suppress access to knowledge. And there's a saying in my head, I don't know who said it, don't trust a man who only reads one book. But I think, you know, it's important that we are widely, we don't have to be academic, but we need to be widely versed in many things. And again, that comes back to the Gracie, where there is so much that we can delve into. And it's not expected that we delve into all of it, but at least taste everything. Because when you've tasted everything, you'll know what tastes you like and you can delve deeper.
It reminds my mother, and I didn't like things, but you haven't tasted it. I used to hate when she would say this. But Debbie says, you'll not learn unless you ask. And I think
Absolutely.
That is so true. And research has shown that, you know, students, anyone learning, those who ask the questions have better outcomes in terms of their learning. And there's never such thing as a stupid question. And naive questions or outsider questions are really, really important to ask.
Yeah. Well, if my son ever gets to watch this, I want a grandchild, because I'm so looking forward to having, you know, the young person around us. Why is this, Nanny? Why is this, Nanny?
And it's wonderful. Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say something and it's gone. It'll come back. Given the world today, where I suppose we've just come out of the election in the US, and then there's this pandemic, and then there's climate change and all sorts of things. One concern that you have about the modern world?
I think there's two. I think I chose a word at the beginning, at the start of every year. I choose a word that's my word for the year, and I think when you do that, you tend. It's like buying a red car. You see a red car everywhere when you buy a red car. So when you have a word, you see it and it deepens you. So my word this year, interestingly, was integrity. And it's been so important. You know, I've seen the lack of integrity in this world everywhere. And going back to Barack Obama, he used a phrase last night, the fidelity of truth. And I love that. Absolutely love it. And I think it's something we've got to see in more and more people. And so my fear at the moment is lack of integrity leads to the second thing, which is ignorance. And so David Attenborough's mission, he's just released a book where he's given his mission, and the film as well. And it's heart-wrenching, absolutely heart-wrenching, that in the space of one lifetime, so much damage has been done, and it's been done because of lack of integrity, which has allowed ignorance to continue. And I'm fearful, you know, the way he lays it out within my grandchild when it arrives, but within my grandchild's life, this world could finish. That is so close, so close. It's by the year 2100, and it's that lack of integrity amongst the people that matter, that feigned ignorance or whatever, that no matter how it feels like, no matter how hard we work towards saving this planet for those people, it can't happen if that lack of integrity continues. I read 2 days ago that they're saying Donald Trump is going to sign off all these drilling rights before he leaves office in Alaska, and I know that the president-elect in office can reverse them, but again, you know, he's going to have to pay millions in compensation, I'm sure. But that is lack of integrity again. And, you know, I could sit here and go forever, you know, high-speed 2-rail link and cutting down trees and,
yes. And it's not ignorance on the part of Trump.
Yes.
Consciousness, but certainly not ignorance.
Feigned ignorance.
Yeah. My daughter saw the film, and I was really, really pleased because she's often is just a cool teenager like you and your hippie druid stuff. And she was so animated by it, and she said she would bring it to getting the schools. Everyone, all young people should see this film,
yes,
etc. Because she was really, really animated by the whole idea. And I mean, when I watched it, when he was giving the statistics, you know, in the 1950s, it was 64%, we'll say. When he started first as a young man, so it was 64% of the world was wilderness. And then every decade or so, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. And it's like, oh my goodness, that is really, really scary.
And what was interesting as well, if you've not seen it, is he talks about how education in third world countries is reducing the population because girls are, you know, they're staying in school longer, they're not having children till later, they're having smaller families. And our politicians have got to understand this, that actually the way to stop all these debates about who comes into a country or doesn't come into a, you know, all of that rubbish that's going on, actually, if people's country where they live is giving them all the opportunities they want, they would not want to leave. And that means, and you know, I'm a firm believer, irrelevant of my politics, I'm a firm believer in open borders across the world. But I think if we actually have equality across the world, it doesn't really matter. Because if we move around, it really doesn't matter at all. And so he actually says anyway that the population will peak at 11 million and then start to fall. But that is still way, way, way above where we are at the moment.
what are we now? Are we 7, 8?
Something like that, yeah. But the
That's what we
West
were.
is actually peaked. It's third
Okay.
world countries that are still growing. But he actually said that education and freedom of education, especially for girls, is what's going to help accelerate this, as in accelerating the slowdown.
And I don't know if that's what I was going to. My next question: what gives you hope about the modern world? But education for girls is not a complex. It's not a complex solution.
No,
It's
not
simple.
at all. Mm.
It's a very, very easy solution.
Mm.
What gives you hope for them? Having
I think
spoken.
the youth, because it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that actually the youth are more educated now about what's
Yeah.
going on in the world than we ever were, and they are more animated about that. And the youth have their downside as well, but collectively I think they're not going to have to go through the upheaval we've had to go through to get a deemed level of equality across male, female, what men, what is it Christopher Hughes says, men, women and every persuasion thereof. We've that's been done. Let's put that behind us now. And I think the youth, if they can be animated, and if they, we see them on the streets when Greta was here
Yeah.
protesting, and they came out of school. That's the only thing I think can give us hope for the future, because our generation can no longer do the change that needs to happen. It's got to come from that groundswell of youth, really.
Fingers crossed. When and why would you fight back?
Physically,
Mm.
no. I don't think physical fighting does anything, and I think history has proven that. It might get a temporary solution and stop things, but it never will. I think words are better, and that we've got so many examples where change has happened because of words, permanent change that has been more fundamental and sustained than any war that's been fought. So I'd fight with words, definitely. Physically, never, no.
It's a really interesting one because, there's a lot of anger online that gets expressed
Mm.
verbally, and there's language like fighting and not being moderate, and peace is not going to get you anywhere, and you can't fight fascism with peaceful words. It has to be fighting physically and all of this. And I just watched last week on Netflix, The Long Road to Freedom, based on Nelson Mandela's autobiography, which I read years and years ago.
Yeah.
And towards the end of the film, they show where the white government are trying to negotiate with Mandela while he's still in prison, and negotiate his release. And his comrades are saying, "You're not going to negotiate. They're the enemy. They're the ones who've caused all this problem." And Mandela says, "I am going to talk to them." And they say, "Okay, we're going to release you on condition you renounce violence." And he goes, "No." And he said, "I'm not a violent man. I've tried peaceful means. They didn't work. And this is how the ANC eventually started resorting to violence." And he stood his ground. It amazed me that how strong he was. So his comrades are saying, "You're not to negotiate with them." And the white guy says, "We want you to renounce violence." He's going, "No, this is going to be non-conditional." Anyway, they do release him. And I lived in Lesotho, and I was living
Mm.
there when I watched it on television when he was released, which was absolutely amazing. But then he's released, and then he sees Winnie, who's his wife, who's been engaging in lots of violence. And there's a scene in the film where this woman comes up to him and hands him a note and says, "Madiba, you have to do something. You have to do something. You have to do something." And then the next shot shows him in front of the TV screen. He's speaking to the nation, and he's saying, he reads out this note, and she says, "Peace is no good. We don't want peace. We don't want peace. We have to fight." And he said, "We are not fighting. We are having peace. And I am your leader. And I am telling you, we are having peace." So it was really interesting how this man had that, what would you say, that deep trust of his inner knowing, where he
Mm.
had his comrades saying, "We're not going to negotiate with the whites because of what they've all done to us." And then he has some of his own side saying, "We want to fight." And he goes, "No, that's not worked." And he said, "They have a bigger machine. We're never, ever going to beat the South African army."
Mm.
And what he did worked. Now, it's not all sweetness and light there, nor is it sweetness and light in anyone's country at the moment. You know, there is lots of poverty and there's lots of human rights abuses, no matter where we are in the world. But he brought about that, and that was through talking. And you could see in the film, you know, the white negotiators being really, really impressed with him.
Mm.
You know, and I think that's it. So it's about words and gestures and forgiveness and reaching out and willing to communicate with people.
I completely agree.
So you're a pacifist always.
Yes.
Even
But
if
I
somebody
don't take that. I don't take that as an insult either. You know,
No.
No, but many people, if you say, "Oh, you're a pacifist," they take that as almost an insult. And I think, you know, there's got to be more listening and more intelligent talk in this world. And sometimes, you know, progress isn't linear. Sometimes to go forward, you've got to go back as well. And so when you do go back and things, you know, when people are changing, they'll make mistakes. And it's that being understanding and forgiving that still allows you to move forward. And there's all sorts of examples, but I don't want to go into those sorts of things. But basically, I don't think progression is linear. And so I think people do need to be more accommodating, understanding, and more focused on what the bigger goals are. And if you do that with integrity, it's the whole sit at the desk, Boris Johnson or Donald Trump or whoever it is, sit behind your desk and say, do I benefit? And if you're giving out contracts and paying £20 million to a middleman in Spain for doing absolutely bugger all, no, that's got no integrity about it.
I think I must remember that question because I know I remember you told me that before, but I think it's a really, really important. It's a very, very good rule of thumb to have. Do I benefit from this? A person in your life that you admire?
Oh gosh, so many. Gosh, Buddha, of course, but put him to one side. We'll take that as a given. Love to have met the guy. He's amazing. The Dalai Lama. I've met the Dalai Lama a number of times. And I think he is the embodiment of compassion. He's got a very wrathful side to him. And he, you know, at the end of the day, compassion can be wrathful compassion. And we see that with our own children, that sometimes you can have compassion, but you need to direct them and teach them. And you have to be a little bit wrathful sometimes.
Sorry,
But I
what's
think
the word you said there? You mentioned a word. I missed it.
Wrathful.
Oh, okay. So you have seen the Dalai Lama express wrath, yes?
Oh yes, yes.
Okay.
But but if you can express it in the right way, it's a teaching experience, and that's what it's meant as. The Obamas, both of them, Michelle and Barack Obama, I admire them. A woman I admire. So I remember at school reading The Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And it was the first time I understood that women could be more than housewives and mums and all this sort of thing. And it's interesting because when I got my first ever bonus at work, there was an auction in New York, and I remember seeing a catalogue and there was a book for sale, and it was the first edition of Simone de Beauvoir's Second Sex. And it was leather bound, signed by her, and the gold around the pages hadn't even been broken. And I won it. I bought it. I blew my whole bonus on one book, and I've still got it to this day. And I've never opened it. I've got my sort of paperback copy, but I've got this one book. And you know, people will say, "What's the point of a book if you never open it?" And I say, "Well, I've got a copy I read." But I believe I like to get authors to sign books that I buy because I think they impart their energy to the book by doing that. And, you know, to hold a book by a woman who had such an impact on me as a very young teenager, really.
I remember.
Push, yeah. So Simone de Beauvoir. I'd actually say, and I hate to say this in a Druid talk, but Steve Jobs. I did some pro bono work in Paris once, and huge story, and we haven't got time for that. But within that pro bono work, someone was telling me they'd actually heard a story, which was true, it turns out, where Steve Jobs was in a design meeting, And he asked his engineers to design the perfect pen and left them to do all this work. And then apparently at the end of it, he just did that and said, "This is the best pen you'll ever have because you'll never lose it. It never runs out of ink, etc." And that became, you know, what we use, smartphones and iPad, all of this. That's what came out of it. And I think I admire him because he lived a very simple life. He was a Buddhist and lived a very simple life. But he changed the world, and he changed the world without firing one shot from a gun. And I think, irrelevant of the business side of it, to have the ability to do that and still remain true to yourself, I guess, and whatever your beliefs are, but harm nobody while you're doing it. And I say, leave the business side out of it, because I know there's going to be loads of business issues around that. But this whole imagination to change the world, I admire that totally.
And I suppose, thanks to him, we're
doing what we're doing.
We're doing what we're doing. I found initially, when the first time I was on Tea with the Druid, it was kind of, you know, I have a kind of a love-hate relationship with technology, and then saying, well, I have to admit, you know, this is really beneficial, and particularly this year, 2020, to be able to use technology like this, to have access to talks, conferences, whatever, gatherings, has just been absolutely amazing. And then even personal conversations with people that, you know, it's an ill wind that doesn't blow some good.
I think it would have been a very, I was going to say, I think it would have been a very scary time for many people without the technology we've got, having been locked up for, 8 months?
I think so. I think it would be a bit like being in a darkened room, and or you're just looking at your own four walls. I mean, okay, there would have been telephones to ring, but that's all. I think that would have been really, 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 really difficult.
Yeah.
Somebody else asked, now you've maybe have already mentioned it, but your favorite book. Now, I don't know if it's the second sex. There may be another book. Just somebody earlier on just said, what's your favorite book?
Favorite book? Oh my gosh. How do you choose? I would say
of the 10,000?
At least. Kevin's actually set me a challenge, because I used to have something called Delicious Library on my computer where you can scan your books. So when I lived alone, I had to do it because my insurance company insisted on it, and I've not kept it up. So anyway, I've got all that to do. I would judge it by books that I have read many, many times. And the one that's jumping into my mind is Women Who Run with the Wolves by Clarissa Pinkola Estes. And on the basis of the back of that book, I've got all her books down. She did a whole series of recorded books that never came out in paper as well.
Oh.
And I just love, I think it's also partly because I loved fairy tales as a child as well. And I love the fact that it took a woman to basically stand up and say, all these whitewashed fairy tales are rubbish, basically. And that stories are there to teach children about the bad of the world, the good of the world, the morals of the world, etc. And to have a woman who is a keeper of stories and a Jungian psychologist bringing that together, I think it's contributed so much to the world. And if that grandchild is a girl, I've told my son, at the age of 13, she and I are going away on retreat with a copy of that book, and we're going to work our way through those stories.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. I love it. I love it. Brilliant. Somebody just says, I've just acquired this book. Looking forward to reading it.
Oh, and you'll love it. Love it, love it, love it.
I loved it. And I always felt I didn't belong in my family. And I know I'm blonde now, but
is it zygote?
The missing zygote story.
Yes.
Yeah. And I was a redhead, and this is my wisdom hair. And so I looked different to the rest of my family. There was red hair on both sides of the extended family, but not my immediate family. And I remember reading this, and the story is that if you feel that you don't belong in your family of origin, is because on the night you were born, the stork was flying over and you were in the nappy and it was a gust of wind and I
No,
think the
no,
storm.
you're so excited. You're jumping up and down.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
No. I don't remember like that by mistake the stork drops you and you drop into the wrong house and that explains
Oh,
it. And I remember, I mean, it's such a simple story, but I was
yeah.
very reassured. I said, oh, that explains it. That explains why I'm in this house. And then as I got older, it was like that notion of you choose your parents, you know,
Mm.
when you think of your pre-incarnation and you made an agreement and a contract with. And I remember the first time coming across that, there's no way I did that. But I'm more comfortable with that notion now that, you know, I've had a lot of choice, I think, or it comforts
Mm.
me to believe that I have chosen this
Yeah.
incarnation and to experience what this incarnation offers.
Yeah.
Whether it's true or not, but anyway, it offers me, it makes sense
If
to
it's
me and gives
true
me
for you, it's true.
exactly, and I love that. Um, uh, what is your okay? We've done favorite book. What is your favorite season or was it season and I suppose festival?
Mm. It has always been autumn. Always. And I remember, you know, when I have first read that the colours of leaves are the true colours of what that leaf is. You know, once the green disappears, you see the true colour. And, you know, they just make my heart sing. The colours of the leaves and the smell. And I tell everybody about this word because I discovered this word and it sums everything up about autumn. And the word is petrichor. And so petrichor, it's the smell that's emitted when the soil gets damp. And that smell is created by bacteria. But it is that smell that we all love, that
I know it. Yeah.
rainforesty, mouldy leaves, and oh, love it, love it, love it, love it. And actually, the reason they assigned a word to it is because there's something within our brains that goes back to ancient man, and that smell would tell him where water was. And that's why so many of us have a positive reaction to it.
I love that.
Mm.
Petrichor. How do you spell it?
Petrichor, 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 and it comes from Greek. So it comes. Oh, Petri is, I think, rotting down or something, and the ichor is blood of the gods, something like that. It's.
I'm going to look
Uh,
that up.
I
I
think
love.
I may be wrong, but I think that's it. But this word, oh, so autumn, and then I've been watching every single one of these, and so many people say Samhain, and I'm going to say Samhain, and it's not it's not because of Samhain. It's because to me, I love autumn and winter. I I can go in the sun, but I do burn easily, and I don't like it when it's too hot. But to me, autumn and winter is that time when you don't feel guilty about just settling down, reading a book, having a hot cup of tea, just retreating into yourself, letting everything just settle and, you know, look over the year, see what you've done, set the plans for next year, get the allotment catalogue out, plan your seeds, you know, all the good stuff happens in those 2 months. And then the hard work of actually doing comes later. But I love that time of reflection and settling and looking ahead and planning and knowing that that's all going to come after this hibernation time. So I think humans should hibernate, but in an awakened state.
I love the idea of hibernation, and I suppose it really struck me in 2010 when we had that um, big snow. And
Mm.
in Kilkenny, where I live, if it snows at all, it rarely stays. And I know I see Jane hibernating in the cave with a book, awesome time of year. And I've seen photographs that Jane has put up, you know, of snow. And I'm thinking, already?
Mm.
And it's like snow is just so far away from where we are here in Ireland. And I've only had 2 white Christmases in my life. One was 1963 and the other was 2010. And the snow stayed here and we had ice. I now have a warm house, but Philip and Stephanie still claim that you have to have 10 hot water bottles if you come and stay in my house. It was cold because they were 7 years ago, I think, in November. It was a bit chilly. But we had, in 2010, the ice froze inside our bedroom window. And we thought there's no point in the house because it could just go out through the roof. But I remember Howard and I walking along in the snow and out in the ground, out looking on undisturbed snow. And my work stopped, everything stopped. The whole country came to a standstill. I thought, this is nature telling us just to stop. And it was just so, so magical. And I'm hoping that this is what the pandemic is doing, will help me as well, is to, I mean, I know there's a lot of pain and all of that, but that somehow that allowing us to draw in a bit more and to reflect and to have a more hibernating winter, because winters have always been rush. You take a course for winter, you know, in the evenings, and then there's Christmas. Even though whether you're a pagan or not, we cannot, certainly this part of the world, avoid Christmas. Certainly culturally you can't. And it's all that rush, mad, spend, and just to be able to have a break from it. We have an explanation. Petrichor, earthy scent produced when rain falls on dry soil, constructed from the Greek petra, rock, stone, and ichor, the fluid that flows in the veins of the gods. That's beautiful. Thank you, David. That was just lovely. So I'm all for hibernation. That's beautiful. I want to say, when you pass, or so Jane says, I love the silence that fresh snow spring brings. And I agree there's a similarity during the still point of human history. Yeah, I love the sound of snow.
And the smell.
Yeah, and it's that. Because that petrichor, which is when you said that smell, you could find water. I recognize that. It's like there's a huge resonance there. And then the same with snow, that the sound of it, when I love walking through it in a forest and you could hear it. There's magic. And it's also a magical experience. It just is. Yeah. When you pass, would you like to be buried or excarnated or cremated, or how would you like to?
Good question. I mean, in Tibet, sky burials were the norm at one stage, weren't they? But I went on an ovate Gorseth last year, I think it was, and Emma Rostel-Orr came and did a talk at this particular teaching, and it was very interesting listening to her, because she's actually set up, for want of better words, a cemetery, but it's in trust. And so what will happen is people are buried wrapped in shrouds at the minimum level they can be buried legally. And so they're not huge deep graves, they're quite shallow graves. And she puts a marker, there's a particular marker that you could scan later on anyway, for where each person is laying. And she gives it, I can't remember the exact times, but it's like she gives it about a year for people to visit the loved ones as they are without disturbing anything. In the second year, a wild flower meadow is sown over it. And so as the bodies start all over that, so imagine one field is full. Then after a year, they'll sow wildflowers, and it's a wildflower meadow for, say, 5 years. And then after 5 years, they'll plant trees, and the trees will grow amongst the bodies. And then after all the land is full, it's in trust as a nature reserve. And that's down Warwickshire, I think it is, that she's got. And it's all going as we speak. And I thought, how beautiful would that be? You know, to be gently wrapped in a shawl, you know, no embalming or anything like that, to be gently laid in the earth with something very pagan as that happens, a space that allows people to come and visit when they need to. And then wildflowers will grow from my body, and then I'll become a tree, and it's just beautiful. So I think I must make provision for that, but Emma, that's what I'd like to do.
I think it's a lovely idea. The only thing I have with that is I like the idea of a marker, a headstone,
No, this thing, so this marker, you can always track where it is. So in years to come, you'll know exactly which tree you've become.
Oh, your descendants will. Okay, because I love because I know, because I live next door to a graveyard and Howard is buried there, and I imagine
Yes.
I'm never
Yes,
going
you
there.
married me there.
Oh, I did. Graveyard, that's right.
Well, not literally.
I know that. I like headstones and I like seeing that, but also I'm a tree person, so I'm like, it's so that somebody can find it. That's the bit I like, to be able to, for descendants to be able to say, this is where they are, and the idea of, this is your great grandfather, your great grandmother, this oak tree or whatever it is. I just think it's amazing. I think it's an absolutely wonderful idea.
I like the idea of my great grandchildren coming along and saying, "Oh, look, our great grandmother is an oak tree or a beech tree or whatever it is." That's beautiful.
I mean, I mean, I know our spirit goes, but to think of, your physical body being part of a tree, it's, it's a bit like being physically immortal in some way, or a part of you, or transmuting into a tree, because obviously, well, our bones won't break down. But I just, the whole idea is absolutely fascinating. What brings you joy, Ellie?
Oh, I think it's the simple things. I get so much joy because our little retreat that we did all those years ago, those people have stayed together through thick and thin. I mean, we've lost people, we've seen people through illness and sadness and happiness, all of it. And I call them my Mabonites. So I know a few of them will be listening, but all of you bring me huge joy. I think in my personal life, I get family joy. I do enjoy family time. Lists. I mean, it's just going to sound cliche as I go through the lists. I think you can find joy pretty much in everything if you allow yourself to. And you can get joy just from sitting, joy just from, my allotment brings me joy, walking the dogs brings me joy, going to bed with the dogs brings me joy, whatever it is, all of it brings me joy. So life.
You said something that is important. You said, if you allow yourself to. And I think that is so important, that you allow yourself joy. There are some worldviews that you shouldn't be taking, that life is hard and we must suffer on this earth, and it's still there, that notion, and maybe the next world is better. But I think the greatest tribute you can give to you, your family, and your whole, is to experience joy and to allow yourself that simple pleasure, a smile, like you're talking about true colors of the leaves. I saw the new moon just through the window last night, and the sky was just so dark, and there was just this perfect crescent, and then I could see the trees, and it just that lift. I wasn't expecting it, because I was thinking of something else. It's those kind of things, and to be able to experience that, and it's around giving yourself permission and allowing yourself to do that.
And we're all different. I mean, my son can go in the garden and see a spider's web covered in dew, and he'll want to photograph it because he'll see the joy and the beauty and all of that. Whereas Kevin suffers with arachnophobia, and he will not go in the garden if there's a visible spider anywhere. And so you can allow yourself to a point, but we're all different, which is why there's a lot of cliche answers to that, but there's a lot of personal answers as well.
And and what is joy for one is not necessarily for another, but it's to be able to find it in something.
But we're making a personal choice as well, aren't we?
That's true. That's true. Ellie, it has been just an absolute joy talking to you.
You're welcome.
I'm just going to see if I can. Oh, I have some lovely comments. Joyful. Was it no? There's some lovely comments about you. Such a wonderful chat tonight. Thanks, Ellie and Eimear, for your wisdom and sharing experience. Ellie, I would have so many questions coming from the same tradition. You and OBOD. Such a great spiritual group indeed. Such a great spiritual group. There were some other ones. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and words of wisdom this evening. It has been an absolute joy, Ellie. And
Thank you.
I want to say good night to everybody. And thank you all for coming, joining us. Apologies for the mess at the beginning, but also your comments are just so wonderful because you actually almost like in the room with us and contributing to the conversation. And it's just absolutely wonderful. So wonderful, all of this from Corinne. I can say I've benefited immensely from your wisdom. Thank you. And indeed, I'm sure many people have, Ellie.
Thank
so
you
I'm going
much.
to stay where you are, but I'm going to say goodnight to you now. Just stay where we are. So I just want to say goodnight to everybody. And thanks again. And I look later at your comments. And I look forward. Oh, I'm looking at the wrong place. I look forward to seeing you all next week for another episode of Fireside Chat with another mystery guest. So have a good week and be well. Slán go fóill agus feici mé sibh an seachtain seachún. I'll see you all next week. So bye-bye.